Okay, now can you hear me? All right, let's go ahead and get started with our next group. This topic is computational thinking. And the groups are Hazzan Meyer, Stephanie Solomon, and Dave Matthews. So give them a big round of applause.
We're going to start with a video that shows kind of how computational thinking produces results, and then we'll talk about what it is.
Prepare
Visualization is right at the heart of my own work too. I teach global health. And I know having the data is not enough. I have to show it in ways people both enjoy and understand. Now, I'm going to try something I've never done before. Animating the data in real space, with a bit of technical assistance from the crew.
So, here we go. First, an axis for health. Life expectancy, from 25 years to 75 years. And down here, an axis for wealth. Income per person, $400,000, $4,000, and $40,000. So, down here is poor and sick, and up here is rich and healthy. Now, I'm going to show you the world 200 years ago, in 1810. Here come all the countries. Europe brown, Asia red, Middle East green, Africa south of Sahara blue, and the Americas yellow. And the size of the country bubbles show the size of the population. And in 1810, it was pretty crowded down there, wasn't it? All countries were sick and poor. Life expectancy were below 40 in all countries. And only UK and the Netherlands were slightly better off, but not much. And now, why start the world? The Industrial Revolution makes countries in Europe and elsewhere move away from the rest. But the colonized countries in Asia and Africa, they are stuck down there. And eventually, the Western countries get healthier and healthier. And now we slow down to show the impact of the First World War and the Spanish flu epidemic. What a catastrophe. And now I speed up through the 1920s and the 1930s. And in spite of the Great Depression, Western countries forge on towards greater wealth and health. Japan and some others try to follow, but most countries stay down here. Now, after the tragedies of the Second World War, we stop a bit to look at the world in 1948. 1948 was a great year. The war was over, Sweden topped the medal table at the Winter Olympics, and I was born. But the differences between the countries of the world was wider than ever. United States was in the front, Japan was catching up. Brazil was way behind, Iran was getting a little richer from oil, but still had short lives. And the Asian giants, China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Indonesia, they were still poor and sick down here. But look what is about to happen. Here we go again. In my lifetime, former colonies gained independence, and then finally they started to get healthier and healthier and healthier. And in the 1970s, then countries in Asia and Latin America started to catch up with the Western countries. They became the emerging economies. Some in Africa follows. Some Africans were stuck in civil war and others hit by HIV. And now we can see the world today in the most up-to-date statistics. Most people today live in the middle, but there are huge differences at the same time between the best of countries and the worst of countries. And there are also huge inequalities within countries. These bubbles show country averages, but I can split them. Take China, I can split it into provinces. There goes Shanghai. It has the same wealth and health as Italy today. And there is the poor inland province Guizhou. It is like Pakistan. And if I split it further, the rural parts are like Ghana in Africa.
And yet, despite the enormous disparities today, we have seen 200 years of remarkable progress. That huge historical gap between the West and the rest is now closing. We have become an entirely new converging world. And I see a clear trend into the future. With aid, trade, green technology and peace, it's fully possible that everyone can make it to the healthy, wealthy corner.
Well, what you just seen in the last few minutes is a story of 200 countries shown over 200 years and beyond. It involved plotting of 120,000 numbers. Pretty neat, huh?
Hit the lights. So our presentation, computational thinking, problem solving in the 21st century. So the 21st century, the information age, but as Hans Rosling just pointed out, having the data is not enough. We know this, right? Otherwise we'd be super successful in the classroom. Having the data is not enough. We have to be able to show it in ways that people both enjoy and understand. So to highlight some of the data in Rosling's visualization, 200 countries, he said, 200 years, 120,000 numbers, all made possible through a little bit of technical assistance. I'd like some of that in the classroom. So what has Rosling done? He has harnessed the technology to interpret data. We argue today that Rosling is a good, engaging example of someone who's a computational thinker. He knows how to use the technological tools. The tools are not replacing him. It's not artificial intelligence. We still saw Rosling interpreting the data, arguing for the data, envisioning what could be done with the data, but that visualization was pretty exciting. It felt very 21st century to see the data that way, and new questions were already popping into my mind. New connections were being formed because of what that visualization provided. So clearly he had some help to harness that technology. Rosling did. He asked for that technical assistance. So a computer programmer had to program the software that ran it. But Hans Rosling, the computational thinker that he is, had to be able to imagine and understand what could be done with the technology that's now available to us. He had to think computationally. So we've heard about the digital age. I got in a bit of an argument with my husband this morning about this, okay? Because I was trying to make this argument, let's scratch that digital age, that's so turn of the century, okay? Because you're going to hear about computer science today. And he said, whoa, hold up, he's a statistician, okay? He said he wanted me to replace this slide with the age of statistics. Or, he said, as a compromise, we could talk about the age of data science. I decided to ignore him, and I often do, and stick with this idea of computer science, although because it does emphasize the way in which the application of computer technology has transformed every field of study today. So we're starting to see now that computer science has to come out of its own little silo. What we're really talking about here is interdisciplinarity, in which the computer sciences and computer technologies are feeding all of us in the other disciplines. And so that now there is this sort of demand that we all need to know how, when, and where computers and other digital tools can help us solve our problems. That this is the challenge that we face going forward. Now, so the caveat I told my husband I would leave you all with is, this does not mean we all have to learn to code. Okay? We do not all have to be computer programmers, although it's not a bad idea. I'm actually thinking about taking the C++ course this summer now, because I've gotten sort of excited about the idea of picking up some coding. We don't all have to learn how to be coding, because truth be told, you guys remember the WYSIWYGs? Anybody know what a WYSIWYG is? Okay. Back when we first learned how to do HTML, we thought we were pretty snazzy, but then those WYSIWYGs came along, what you see is what you get, and now you've got these interfaces, you don't even have to know the HTML to design web. Well, that's what's happening with programming as well. There's fun little programs like Scratch that they're using for grade school kids already, where it's just a set of interlocking stacking blocks. So kids can program their own little computer games, but with just snapping little blocks together. They don't have to know the code. So we don't all have to be coders, but there's a paradigm shift at work. Are we so last century? Okay, I feel, okay. Is that still us? Has technology changed education? We've talked a lot about that on Monday, technology changing education. But yet I think there's still a lot of ambivalence. Maybe I'm projecting, okay? I'll speak for myself. I know I feel a little ambivalent, right? I came of age in that last century, okay? I was educated in that last century. I feel a little last century, okay? I'm not a Luddite, but I'm not a digital native either. So there is some ambivalence, I feel, as an educator about this big transformation that we're in the midst of. But when I start to push on myself and maybe push on y'all about, have we really changed ourselves? Or are we still back in 20th century approaches with a few new bells and whistles? And what would it look like for us to make a radical paradigm shift with our educational practices to match the radical shifts that are currently underway? And so are we even asking the right questions about education? So here's our brain on computers. That's a little joke for all the rest of you who remember the 80s and our brain on crack, right? Those sort of jokes. Clearly, the computer has become an appendage. Again, I don't think we need to see this as artificial intelligence. The main idea here with computational thinking is that computers, in conjunction with human imagination, offer a potent problem-solving strategy. Okay, that we have to be thinking in tandem. We created the computer, but it's true, the computer is in the process of changing us. Okay, philosophers are starting to write about this. Brain science is proving it, right? Our brains are rewiring themselves. Our brains are literally changing as we interface with new technology. It's always been happening. It's happened with our prior technologies as well, like print. Our brain's evolving, education has to evolve with it. Is this scary? You know, I don't know, but resistance is futile. Do you think this is sci-fi? I don't know. Looks like Google Glasses, if you ask me. So we are now literally starting to see the world differently through computers, right, and through the use of computer-assisted technology, which is going to become more embedded, quite honestly. I see it becoming more and more embedded in us and in our lives than less so. So do we resist, or do we embrace and sort of rid ourselves of our ambivalence and step forward into this brave new world, which has some new opportunities for us to see the world differently? This is the 2008 electoral map for the 2008 presidential campaign race. Here it is represented in population data through some of these cool new visualizing programs that people are playing around. The latest one I saw on Facebook was a map representing supermarkets to bars. Showing the United States map and density of supermarkets compared to bars. So there's a lot of fun visualization software. I'll show you a few of it. But what do we see? Do we see that things are a little different when we look at things with some of our technology now? The old map, as we've been looking at it for hundreds of years. A new map represented for population data. India and China look pretty important, pretty big. So moving beyond, one of our ideas today is let's move the conversation, shift the paradigm from a conversation just about literacy, which in the research that we're reading on this topic is defining computer literacy as use without understanding. Okay, we are just users of the software that's produced. To, okay, a step up, fluency. But computational thinking, where we're aiming today, now we're not just understanding the concepts, we're also thinking about creating and designing them. Okay? I'm down here. I'm still that passive user and consumer. But I think our students are going to, that digital native student, I think they're going to demand more and more out of technology. They're just going to keep insisting. They're not skeptical. They're just going to insist that there's a tool that can do everything for them. Because they've never lived in our world. So Jeanette Wing is the instigator, a computer scientist, Carnegie Mellon University, of this movement, who wrote this influential paper in 2006 from which these ideas all stem from, that argued for computational thinking as really a new transformation of the core. Okay? That we can't just be thinking about reading, writing, and arithmetic. We now have to think about, going back. We now need to think about what that core is in the 21st century, and how is it possible for that core to not include computer science? So what will our TCC computer competency look like in 2050? How will we prepare students for 2050? Instead of a computer competency requirement, should we be thinking along the lines of computational thinking or computer science? Some research from some studies that have been looking at K through 12. This comes on a report called Running on Empty, the failure to teach K through 12 computer science in the digital age. Arguing for, we're living in this ever-intensive computer world. And to prepare for these jobs in this economy of the future, we have to have that deeper understanding of the fundamentals. Florida, I actually have to say, is in this regard, and notice we're talking about the STEM gap here. Florida, in this regard, is one of 11 states that has now instituted a revised K through 12 curriculum that includes a credit for computer science. There is only 9 states in the nation that make it a requirement of a math and science. In Florida, it's still an elective, so we're better than a lot. But those 9 where really the recommendation is we should be looking at computer and science requirements for math and science. But Florida's out in front of this, much further out in front than a lot of the country. So this is that STEM gap we've been talking about. We've heard so much about that shortfall in the fields of computer science. But again, just to remind you, clearly a lot of this job growth, this shortfall is in computing and computer science. But where are these computer scientists going? They're not going back to their silo anymore all alone. The growth in this industry is that now computer scientists are everywhere. They're embedded. Okay? In every discipline and office building, they're infiltrating. So one, yeah, we want to jump on top of this STEM thing and be preparing our students for these possible jobs, but we also want to be thinking about the rest of us are going to have to talk to these people. And going to have to help them create the tools that we want. So where are we going to, it's going to be more than just a skills gap, which is what we've been focusing on trying to close now, but is that short-sighted to just think about a skills gap when what we really need to be thinking about is the gap in our thinking. And in 2008, Wing made the argument that this raises a real educational challenge to us, is how do we start teaching students to prepare them for this sort of engagement with the concepts of computers and computer design and so forth. Okay, so let's hear a little bit more about what computational thinking entails.
So as Catherine has stated, there's more to computational thinking than just coding. Computational thinking involves logical thinking, scientific thinking, algorithmic thinking, and efficient thinking. So what's logical thinking? Question to the audience. Anybody? I gave you a hand.
So we said
it can be fun. I remember when Sudoku became the popular buzz puzzle, and I took interest in it, looking for something to keep my 3rd grade child entertained, occupied for a little while. But it didn't take her long to master doing the Sudoku. As a matter of fact, she taught me. So that didn't last very long for keeping her preoccupied, and she was in 3rd grade at that time, several years ago. Okay, logical thinking is deducing as much new information as possible from the little bit of information that you have already without jumping to conclusions, right? Think about it. Do you want your nurse, your surgeon, or your mechanic to get it right just by chance? Or do you want them to think logically through what they're doing and be able to come up with 100% accuracy at all times? Okay? How many of you remember the scientific method? Okay, we learned that in elementary school. We had to do the science project. We learned the steps of the scientific method. Scientific thinking involves coming to a conclusion with evidence to support your hypothesis, right? Again, not jumping to conclusions. Algorithmic thinking is using a step process to solve the problem. Okay? So algorithmic thinking involves a lot of the problems are on and off. You have a problem, you apply some steps to solve the problem, and you move on. With algorithmic thinking, the next time you have a similar problem, you'll be able to apply what you've learned already or what you've used and found to work in the past to that problem. So it's not like you're having to rethink the problem through every time. In nursing, when we walk into a patient's room and the IV pump is beeping, it's going to tell us, most these days, it tells you why it's beeping. Okay? So, using the algorithm that is usually found in the manual with the IV pump, but that comes with the IV pump, if it says air in line, I know that there's some steps I need to take to remove the air in line. Depending on where the air is, if it's down low, I can disconnect from the patient, run some of the fluid through, and get rid of the air. If it's up high, I can do back prime and get rid of the air. I learned that, so now every time I have that problem, I don't have to think about what to do. I know what to do to get rid of the air in the line. That's an example of algorithmic thinking. Efficient thinking. Computer scientists have done a very good job with describing efficient thinking. It basically boils down to minimizing the use of resources, the number of resources to get the job done. And we're all familiar with that. We always have to do more with less, okay? The resources will vary, and the most important resource is time, okay? Another example for you would be the Rubik's Cube. Remember that from way back in the day? Did you ever solve it? No. I was always able to solve 4 of the 6 sides, never all 6 without killing. Okay. But for those people who could solve the cube, then the issue became doing it faster. And so there were competitions around the world for who could solve the Rubik's Cube faster. In the movie, Pursuit of Happiness, Will Smith played the part. He was in the back of the cab, remember, trying to solve the Rubik's Cube, and he did it in, so many seconds. So computational thinking, like I said, is more than coding. It is critical thinking and problem solving to help us formulate problems, organize logically, analyze information, represent data, identify solutions, and automating those solutions. Why, how, and where? Why should we be concerned about computational thinking? Why? Well, the hypothesis is that computational thinking should be added to our core curriculum. We need to start training or teaching our students how to think computationally. We need to add this to the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, computational thinking. I couldn't come up with an R. Okay. How to start. An important part of bringing CT into the classroom is finding opportunities to highlight patterns, generalize rules and algorithms, form those recognized patterns, and formalize the rules and procedures in a simple computer program. Another important aspect is data skills, learning how to collect and analyze the data and then have some meaning applied with that data. Where are we going to apply it? The majority of computational thinking will be found in the math and social sciences, right? Because those are the places where, those are the areas that were the biggest opportunities for analyzing data.
So how is this going to fit in at TCC? There's a picture of our QEP at where it was at one stage. I'm sure we're well past that now. But, as we said, that computational thinking is both before and past digital literacy. It's before it in that you want to have students learning to think computationally even when they're away from the keyboard, when they're not playing with computers. And at the same time, it goes beyond it because rather than just using tools, we want to understand how those tools are used and how the data is being worked on inside the computer. Because the better that we understand that, the better we're able to find the correct tools to use through digital literacy. Also at TCC, we've mentioned the computer literacy requirement. Are we going to need to rethink that as we go forward? We looked for some examples from other schools around the country where they have gotten directly involved with programming in the various disciplines. For example, at Towson University, they have a course called Computers and Creativity. And from the description, it involves dynamic storytelling, computer graphics, and music programming for game development. Wheaton College has computing for poets, of all things. It teaches computer programming as a vehicle for exploring formal symbol systems and emphasizes problem decomposition and writing algorithms. At Brigham Young University, they have an entire undergraduate minor in digital humanities, mixing digital skills and the humanities, exploring the integration of computer tools with content from the humanities. And up north in Canada, at Carleton University, they have a course called Introduction to Computers for the Arts and Social Sciences. And that course specifically is designed around the computational thinking paradigm as it applies to arts and social sciences. So the question we were thinking here is, should we maybe consider having some sort of different specific courses designed for our different meta majors so students can see how computer programming applies in the humanities or in the sciences. And so where can we begin here? We've already touched on some of these, but we have some simple steps we can do. We can work on our language. Start using language from computer science in your classroom. Use words like iteration and algorithm, decision tree, parallel processing, synchronization. And we can work on algorithms, specifically show flowcharts for students so they can see how to algorithmically solve processes and problems in almost any discipline. We can talk about coordination in terms of parallel processing. When you have a team working on things and each member is assigned a task, how do you time things so all the tasks are done at the right time, and how do you efficiently delegate the duties to the different team members? We can talk about communication in terms of how we transmit data, how we make sure that we have information transmitted in some sort of an error-free fashion. In computer science, they have error-correcting codes. What kind of things do we have in our own disciplines that match that? And of course, the big one, visualization. How do we represent the data in our different disciplines? We saw the wonderful example at the beginning, and if you think about it, in each different discipline, there are different ways of visualizing, especially descriptive statistics, that fit best for your discipline. And we're going to come back to more specific examples in a minute, but here are just some random examples found in one of the curriculum guides for computational thinking. For example, in history, using a flowchart to support alternate what-if scenarios. One of the examples was, for example, what might have happened if Douglas had won the election instead of Lincoln, and what would the chain of events be? And students could map out with a flowchart, if this happened, then what might happen next? In speech communication, again, how do you transmit ideas? And how do you think about keeping your information clear and ensure error-free transmission of ideas so that people understand what you're saying? And how often do you have to repeat yourself before people know what you're saying? In biology, where models and simulations are taking a huge role, look at the consequences of the computer models. What assumptions are you making when you look at your computer models, and what happens if those assumptions are correct or incorrect? In the social sciences, Catherine's going to talk more about this, but the notion of content analysis, now that we have the ability to process large amounts of verbal data, how can we extract information in different ways from that? And art, of course, digital media. How does new digital media fit in with more traditional media? How do you save and retrieve information, digital information? And in business, we can talk about optimization. There are huge applications there. Again, how do we organize a project to deliver things in a timely fashion? How do we save money? All of those things involve computer skills like parallel processing, like error correction, like algorithms. So we'll have some more specific examples from our own disciplines in just a minute. In fact, I'm going to start with that. Stephanie will be next talking about a case study that uses computational thinking in a very unique way.
Okay. Locked-in syndrome. How many of you know what locked-in syndrome is? Okay. Locked-in syndrome is a condition wherein the sufferer is paralyzed, but all of their mental, or most of their mental capacities are still intact. They can hear, they can see, but they're not able to communicate, okay? So, it's like they're trapped inside their own bodies, functioning bodies, but they're not able to really do anything. Mr. John Dominic Bowlby, I hope I'm saying that correctly, from London, found himself in this condition, and it could happen to any of us after a stroke, okay? He woke up in the hospital, unable to communicate, paralyzed. His only means of communication was blinking his eyes. He had no technology to use, but yet he found a way to communicate with his family, friends, caregivers, and he even wrote a book, The Dying Bell and the Butterfly, his autobiography, okay? How do you think he did that? If that was you, how would you start? How do you think you would start?
Blink.
Blink, okay? And with the blinking, what would we need to do?
He
associated certain words with certain blinking patterns.
Okay, so he started out with blinking. One blink was A, two blinks were represented B, and so on. So you have to blink a lot of times to get to Z, right? And not only that, the helper had to be paying attention. She couldn't blink, or she would miss a blink. So So that was a very difficult way to do that, but that's the start. That's algorithmic thinking, right? To fine tune that, the next step was one way to speed it up was to realize that sometimes halfway through a word, we can guess what the word is, right? Predictive texting, kind of like what happens with our cell phones. So if he had given us A-T-E-L, then what do you think the word might be? A-N-T-E-L.
Antelope.
Antelope. Very good. Okay.
Wheel of Fortune.
Okay, so we could change the rules a little bit to allow the helper to make guesses like that. We would need a way for the person to say no after such a guess. Perhaps the rule could then be that people blink if the word was correct. But still, we could improve on that. Okay? How can he improve on that?
Use a code.
Okay. Right.
Morse code.
Well, we need a way to measure whether or not the algorithm is working. So we're using a little analytical thinking. We could turn this into a math problem. Okay? We could count how many letters of the alphabet the helper has to say. Then we could turn that into time taken by working out how long it takes to make or to say a letter. That is abstraction. And then, to speed this up, because I've gotten my signal, this can still be improved upon by asking very specific questions, as in the 20-question game. The secret is to ask questions that rule out half of the possibilities each time. And this is known as divide and conquer. And the simplest divide and conquer algorithm is called binary search, which is kind of like Google. Okay? Now, Mr. Bobby didn't have this available to him at the time, but if he had known computer science, then writing his book and communicating with his friends, family, and healthcare providers would have been easier.
We'll have to abbreviate some things. We're teachers, we're long-winded. In math, the applications are, I think, probably easier to see, but seeing how we move from a traditional thing like a composition of functions, and you might remember from an algebra class this fog, F composed with G, to how things are now used in computers where you're talking about web diagrams, where you put the function, the value back into the function over and over again, and the students can see how this generates chaotic activity, and then leads to wonderful iterated systems and some beautiful art applications. 3D visualizations now that we can see and think more, use computers so that we can see, instead of an old wooden model, you can look at symmetries all the way through something, and that doesn't show very clearly, but it's also see-through, so you can see both sides at the same time. Reflective properties. We used to just look at the properties of a parabola, reflective properties, they go through the focus. Now we have ray tracing programs so students can look in far more depth at reflective properties and how they work. Or how image manipulation is done on a computer with matrices. We just went through this exact example in my class this afternoon. And where do they see these shapes anymore? Geometric shapes like an ellipse is no longer thought of that way, but it's the oval selection tool on the GIMP program. Or when we're looking at trigonometric functions and adding waves, we can get applications here. This is the old way, and you better be ready for this, and we'll see how loud it is.
Baby, you treat me.
See how they use sine and cosine functions.
I know. No, you don't mean it now.
Okay. So I was, and it's all all right that we cut me short. You know, I was the one who at the end was having to stretch. Although once I got into this, there's so much. I mean, it starts to get crazy, all of the interconnections and how you start seeing this everywhere. Once, you know, I sort of got past the initial, what is computational thinking? And all of a sudden, it's everywhere and it's all, yeah, all in the news. I'll just pull the most interesting little, that's further conversation, you guys. Ngram. I just ripped this from the headlines from NPR. NPR just ran this report in which, and I like this one because this is a rhetorical analysis example, and I teach rhetoric. And here they were on NPR interviewing the president of Hathaway Communications, who was advising President Obama on messaging regarding the debt ceiling. And what had they done? This is public relations. This is my field in which, you know, when I was coming out of college with an English major, they said you got to go into public relations. That's what English majors do, right? This is humanities. And what are they doing now in the humanities? They're doing analytics. They are doing statistics. They are doing word frequency visualizations, data mining of messaging. They data mined the reporting on the issue to come up with a word frequency visualization where they revealed that the problem with the Democrats' messaging was that the GOP and the Democrats were both talking about the debt, and nobody likes hearing about debt. And so what did they advise? They advised the president and the Democrats to shift their rhetoric from debt to default. Change the language. Change the conversation. Don't talk debt, talk default. And what happened? They won. Okay? So Hathaway Communications was taking a big win on this for their rhetorical consultating, which is really just old public relations, but now new analytical tools. You go out to their website, they are not giving this analytics away. Okay? You can be sure they have statisticians and computer scientists in-house who are customizing their data visualization tools so that they can offer this new interpretive stuff to their clients. So it's like crazy exciting, right? This is now what humanities is, you know? It's not just us talking about text, it's us working with computer scientists to mine data and talk about text. How sexy is that? I feel relevant all of a sudden.